Hi, everyone. Welcome to this ProcessMaker 3 training session, which is part of the beginners training series powered by Diamond. I am your host and trainer, Afe Araram. For our 8th session, we shall be discussing task steps and task assignments in ProcessMaker. At the end of this session, you should know the type of process objects that could be added to a task as task steps. You should know how to assign a Dynaform as a step to a task and know about task assignments and have a deeper knowledge about the 6 assignment types that exist in ProcessMaker. So let's unpack all of this. For this lesson, we shall be making use of our tutorial playground process. So let's open that. So remember, we had created a flow for an employee leave request process. Okay. Now, earlier on, we defined a step as an action that must be done to complete a task. And we also said that the task can comprise of one or more steps. Now, when you right-click on any task, you get to see a drop down, and on that drop down, there's the steps option and the assignment rules option. So take steps to open the steps for task modal dialog. And you can see this dialog comprises of 2 aspects, 2 parts. On the left, you get to see the available elements section, and on the right, the assigned elements section. Now, on the left, the available elements section, you can see that available elements we can add, the classes are triggers, Dynaforms, input document, output document, and external steps. So which means a step can either be a trigger, a Dynaform, an input document, an output document, or an external step. And so far, so good. As you can see, we don't have any trigger. The only things we have here are 2 Dynaforms. Okay, now on the right side, this is where you drag your available elements to comprise of your assigned elements, and your assigned elements are your steps. And by default, when you open the steps dialog for a task for the first time, you always get to meet 2 steps, the assignment step and the routing step. Now, these 2 steps are the last steps that will be performed for every task. So even if you drag in so many elements from the left to the right, the assignment and the routing step will always be the last 2 steps for the task. Moving on to the assignment step. The assignment step evaluates the rule defined in the assignment rules property of the next task to determine the next user or group of users that the case will be assigned to at the end of the current task. So let's explain what that means. If an employee raises a case on this process, a request on this process, and the current task is the initiation task. Once the process flow gets to the assignment step of this first task, ProcessMaker will have to evaluate the rule, the assignment rule that has been defined in the succeeding task, which is the primary supervisor approval task, in order to determine who the primary supervisor for the employee is. I come again. At the assignment step of the initiation task, ProcessMaker will have to use the assignment rule that has been defined for the primary supervisor task to determine who the primary supervisor for the employee is. That is, who is the user in ProcessMaker that is the primary supervisor of the employee that ProcessMaker will need to route the case to. Okay. Now, what of when the current task is the primary supervisor task? The assignment step of this primary supervisor task, ProcessMaker will have to determine who the next user will be, which either be the employee, or if the employee has a secondary supervisor, the secondary supervisor, or if the employee has only a primary supervisor, the HRO person. So in other words, the assignment step works in collaboration with the routing step, or rather, the routing step works alongside the assignment step and is used by the ProcessMaker engine to move the case from the current task to the succeeding task. Let's go back to our flow. We said our task 1 of this process map, as you can see on your screen, at the assignment step of the initiation task, ProcessMaker will need to determine who the next user for the request would be. So in this case, who the primary supervisor of the employee, who is the primary supervisor of the employee that has raised the request on the process. Now, the routing step will work alongside the assignment step to then move the case from the queue of the employee to the queue of the primary supervisor. Now, that is for a scenario where there is no decision gateway between the current task and the succeeding task, or the current task and the next task. But what of a scenario where you have a gateway between the current task and the next task? In this case now, let's look at this. If you're looking at this flow, when a request is at the primary supervisor task and the primary supervisor rejects that request, it should go back to the employee. But if the primary supervisor approves this request, there are also two possibilities. If the employee in question has a secondary supervisor, then the case will go from the primary supervisor approval task to the secondary supervisor approval task. However, if the employee in question has only one supervisor, then the case will move from the primary supervisor task to the HRO approval task. So while at the assignment step of the primary supervisor approval task, while at the assignment step in this task, ProcessMaker will need to use the assignment rules defined for this task, this second task, and the HRO approval task, along with the gateway conditions defined for this gateway to determine who the next user will be. If ProcessMaker sees that the rejection condition is true, remember we said for an exclusive gateway, only one condition can evaluate to be true at any given time. So there will be 3 conditions here. If we look at the properties, there will be 3 conditions here. 3 conditions. So let's assume we are using the variable is approved to determine these conditions. So if is approved is equal to 0, the case should be rejected. Now, Let's copy that. If is approved is a 1, or we can also change of using 0, we can say no. If is approved is no, it should be rejected. If is approved is yes, then it should go forward. And it can go forward either to the secondary supervisor approval task or the HRO approval task. So then, if you look at this set of conditions we've put now, there's going to be a conflict for the forward path, the supervisor, secondary supervisor, and HR approval. So that is where we need to define another condition. Says, sorry, and secondary supervisor, let's make this bigger. Secondary supervisor is equal to yes. We copy this and we come down here. And this will be a no. So if you look at this set, only one set of condition can be true at any given time. Once is approved is a no, it doesn't matter whether the employee has a secondary supervisor or not. The case goes backward to the employee. If is approved is yes, then ProcessMaker will check to evaluate the second part of the condition, which is the secondary supervisor. If secondary supervisor is a yes, it means the employee has a secondary supervisor and the case goes forward to the secondary supervisor approval task. But if secondary supervisor is a no, then the case goes forward to the HRO approval task. Okay, so remember now that we have two variables that we are using to determine the conditions for this gateway. So let's copy these variables, save the conditions we've put here, and let's create those two variables. So we have secondary supervisor, let's and then do we have is approved already? No, we can create the is approved too. Is approved variable. Let's also save that. Okay. Now, we said again, let's try just to recap, give a summary, that the routing step works alongside the assignment step and is used by the ProcessMaker engine to move the case from the current task to the next task. And that's working alongside the assignment step is because at the assignment step, the ProcessMaker engine will need to evaluate who the next user would be for the case, who the next person the assignment step will determine the next person to assign the case to, or the next group of persons to assign the case to. Okay? Now, let's go back and add a step, the Dynaform step. Like I said, we have two Dynaforms. We're going to use form A. So we click, hold down our mouse button and drag to this right section, and immediately you see it becomes the first step and it pushes our assignment and routing steps downwards. Remember, we said that the assignment and routing step are the last two steps that will be performed for any given task. Now, the moment we drag in a Dynaform step, you observe that there are three buttons on the right. There's the properties button, and there is the edit button and the remove button. So with clicking on remove, we remove the elements from our list of steps. And that's how you can remove any element, be it a Dynaform or an INPI document or an ALPI document or a trigger. Okay, now the other button I want to talk about would be the next button would be the properties. So properties allows you to define the mode, the view mode for the form. So when the task is in progress and the user gets to see the form, in what mode should the user view the form? If it's edit mode, it means the user is able to interact with the form by inputting the necessary information into the fields that are available. Those that will be required, the user has to fill in something, and those that are optional, the user can choose to fill in data or not. Now, that is the default view mode is always, the default form mode is always the edit mode. Now, for view, it means the user is able to view the form, but the user cannot input any information or data into the form. But we also have a second part of these step properties called condition. Condition. So the condition will determine, if you put a condition for a Dynaform step, then the user can only see the Dynaform when that condition is true. So conditions are a critical aspect of our ProcessMaker design, in the sense that whether for input document step or an output document step or a trigger step, conditions are what allows you to, depending on your process logic, to define what should happen at runtime. So with conditions, we can set a trigger to fire or not based on certain values that exist in the case. I could say if we have a trigger that should only fire when a case is rejected, we could set a condition and say at is approved is equal to no. So in that kind of situation, once the case gets to that step, the ProcessMaker engine will evaluate the condition, and if the condition is true and it says it's a rejected case, then the trigger will fire and the PHP logic in the trigger will be executed. However, if the condition does not evaluate to true, then that trigger is ignored. So conditions are a very good way for us to determine the user experience and the steps that could happen in a process at runtime. Okay. We'll come to see those conditions later when we are dealing with triggers. We'll see them, we'll use them a lot. Okay. The other thing I want to talk to us about before we do some testings here will be to expand to see this. So we have, for every Dynaform step, there is before Dynaform. Same thing exists for our input document and output document step. There is before the step, what should happen. So let's call these checkpoints. The checkpoints that exist as the process flows for a task. Then it's the before Dynaform checkpoints. So what PHP logic would you want the process to run before a Dynaform loads, before the user gets to see and meet the Dynaform? What PHP logic should run? Then what PHP logic should be executed after the user submits the form? All that logic you have to put into this section, the after Dynaform section. Then, do you have PHP logic that should be executed before the assignment checkpoint, where the ProcessMaker engine will have to evaluate who the next user will be? Then if you have such logic, then you place them in triggers and put them, drag them into the before assignment checkpoint section. Now, do you have PHP logic that should be executed at this task before the routing checkpoint, before the ProcessMaker engine moves the case from the current task to the queue of the next user at the next task? Then all that logic or triggers you will put in this section, the before routing section. Then, do you have PHP logic that you want the system to execute after the ProcessMaker engine has moved the request to the queue of the user for the next task. Then you put all of that in the after routing section. So we're going to be playing with these and using these and interacting with these various checkpoints as we work on our demo process. So that's the summary of task steps and the various aspects of task steps that we will need to interact with. Okay, let's quickly move now to task assignment. Now for task assignment rule, so right click on the task, we get to see assignment rules. Select assignment rules and it opens the assignment rules modal dialog. Okay, so as you can see from the screen, we have the case assignment method section. Then we have the users section, the ad hoc users section as well. For both the user section or the ad hoc users section, there are two aspects on the screen, or two parts or portions. We have the available users lists and the assigned users lists. So you drag in users or groups from the available users list to the assigned users lists. Now, the case assignment method is used to select which type of assignment should be used for the task. The type of assignment determines how the specific user that will work on the task for a specific case will be selected. Okay, now the users section allows us to choose which users or groups should be assigned to the task from the list of available users or groups. And the ad hoc section, user section, is used for defining additional users or group to whom a task can be reassigned. Okay, so as you can see from the case assignment method section, we have about 6 assignment methods there. So assignment rules for a task is a matter of how should the user be selected and which users can be selected. Okay, I come again. The assignment rules for a task is a matter of how should the user be selected and which users can be selected. Now, best practice, it's recommended that you assign groups to a task instead of users directly. So let me give you an example. Let's say, so for this user section now, you see we have view all, which would be a combination of the groups. You can see will be the users and the groups that exist on this ProcessMaker instance. We can filter by choosing the radio button view users, and we see only the users, or view groups, and we see only the groups. Now, you could add a user, like the admin user, we could click and drag here. That is one way. Let's remove. Another means is to click on this arrow, this green arrow button. If you click on that, it moves the user into the assigned users list. So those are the two ways you can move a user from the available users list to the assigned user list. Now, it said it's best practice not to assign users to task. Instead, we should assign groups. Instead, we should assign groups. So I can assign one or more groups. For example, I can assign employees and assign supervisors. In fact, as many groups as you want to put, depending on your process and the business requirements around the task for your process. So for the purpose of this lesson, we shall assign only the employees group. Now, let me go back to why I said it's best practice for you to assign a group rather than a user. It's because even if you have a user called James Bond in your test instance and you have the same user, James Bond, in your production instance, those two users will not have the same user UID. So because users with the same name would not have the same user UID across two or more ProcessMaker instances is the reason why when you deploy a process, you export a process from your test to your production instance, and you only assign users, that process will be deployed without the users being assigned. So if I were to assign a user to this task instead of a group, and I deploy the process to production, when the process is imported into production and you check the task assignment for that task, it will be empty. So it's best practice to assign groups to tasks rather than individual users. So that when your process is exported into another instance of ProcessMaker, the user assignments, the group assignments will be preserved. And as such, all you now need to do is to add the required or necessary persons to those groups, and your process is fine. So whenever a process is imported into another ProcessMaker instance, the user assignments are discarded and the group assignments are preserved. Okay, so for the first task, the employee initiates leave request, we're going to assign the employees group. Okay, now let's save that. For the primary supervisor, let's go to assignment rules. We are going to assign the supervisors group. Okay, let's save that. But defining the group for a task assignment is not the only aspect of task assignments that we need to define. Let's go back to the first task, go and select assignment rules again. Earlier on, I said that looking at the case assignment method section, there are 6 assignment types or 6 assignment methods there. The first one, or the default assignment method in ProcessMaker, is the cyclical assignment. This method assigns users from the assigned users to a task in a sequential pattern, or what may be termed a round robin pattern. What does that even mean? To evaluate that, I'm going to do something. Now remember that we have assigned the employees group to this task. Let's remove it and let's save. And let's open our admin menu in another tab and go to users and go to groups, and let's select employees. Let's check what users do we have as employees. Okay, we have Anu Bello. Okay, now let's open up our ProcessMaker instance in another browser and log in as Anu Bello. Anu.bello, and let's type in the password and hit enter. Now, as you can see, we are here. If as Anu Bello, we go to new case, you see that it's empty. It says here, you can't start a case because you don't have a starting task assigned. So it means the user profile, Anu Bello, has not been assigned to any initiation task of any process that exists on this instance. So how do we correct that? So in case you are designing and then you want to test your process and you log in as the user for the initiation task and you cannot find your process on the list of processes that you can start a new case, then you should remember that it is because that user has not been assigned to the initiation task of the process you want to test. So let's go back to Edge and go back to, remember, Anu Bello is a member of the employees group. The very moment we come to assignment rules and assign employees and we save, let's go back to our Brave browser and let's refresh. Then go to new case. Immediately you see tutorial playground employee initiate leave request is now found on our list of cases that we can start a list of processes that we can start a new case on. Okay, now let's go back to our designer. So we want to test what cyclical assignment method is about. And remember we said that at the assignment step of a task, ProcessMaker evaluates who the next user would be that the case will be assigned to using the assignment rules that have been defined for the succeeding task. Okay, so if we are logged in as Anu Bello and we raise a case, then we need to define what would be the assignment method for the next task. So for this next task, we want to test the cyclical assignments, and we have assigned the supervisors group to this task. Okay, now let's check what do we have in the supervisors group. Who are those we have in the supervisors group? We go to users, we see there's Adeola Adeoye, Alex Chidi, and Audu Bako. Okay, so let's go back to Brave and raise a request as Anu Bello. As you can see, you can select a date, and this is just for fun. We'll come back to this later. Let's just select anything. This is not going to determine anything for now. Why? Because we are using a cyclical assignment method. And we said the cyclical assignment method will assign users in a round robin pattern. If you click on submit, what do you see? It's assigning the case to Audu Bako. So what the round robin pattern is about is that ProcessMaker will look at the number of users in the group. Okay, so there are 3 users in the supervisors group. Once a case is raised and it's going to this supervisor's task, or the supervisor task, it's going to pick one. ProcessMaker will pick one of those users to assign the case to. And as you can see here, it has assigned it to Audu Bako. Now, when there is a second case raised, the next case that will be raised, ProcessMaker already knows that it's assigned the first one in the round robin or sequential pattern to Audu Bako. It will select between Alex Chidi and Adeola Adeoye. So let's see what happens. So that is submitted, right? Let's raise another case. Once we submit again, this time it shows Chidi, Alex Chidi. Okay, let's raise another case. Now, the third time, it goes to Adeola Adeoye. Now, the circle is complete, which means by the time we go to the fourth task, remember that a circle will be 3 users. Why? Because there are 3 users in the supervisors group. So a fourth request, round robin pattern, will be assigned to Audu Bako. Let's see if that is true. Raise another case. And we submit. You see it's Audu Bako. So that's what the cyclical assignment is all about. Okay. Now, let's go to manual assignment. Manual assignment, as the name implies, it allows the user completing the current task to choose the user that the task should be assigned to from the list of assigned users for that task. Okay, so let us see. Let's go back to our process. And this time around, let's change this to manual assignments and assign the supervisors group. And then let's save. Once we do that, let's then raise a case now on the process as Anu Bello. Once I click on submit, you see, it tells me to select the next user. And it will give me a drop down that shows all the users in the group that was assigned, the group or the users that were assigned to that task. So let's go back to the form. Let's go back to the form and then go back to the process. Remember, we said best practice, we use groups for our task assignment. Let's assume that we've run foul of that best practice. And in this case, remember we have Adeola, Alex, and Audu. So let's add someone from a user directly now. Let's add the admin. Let's add our admin account and save. And let's go back. Remember we said for the manual assignment method, it will look at the list of assigned users. ProcessMaker will consider the list of assigned users and groups and form a drop-down of those user profiles so that the user on the current task can now select who the user for the succeeding task that uses a manual assignment should be. Okay, so let's go back to Brave. If we submit now, remember, you can see that the admin profile has been added to the list. So that is how, let's go back. That is how the manual assignment method works. Now, let's go back to task assignments. For value-based assignments, the way value-based assignment works is that we use a variable to control the value-based assignments, meaning the variable is holding a value, and that value is what we're using to base on in runtime with that, whatever is that value, it determines the user. And that value, most often than not, if we want to have full control of our process, it's important that we use the UID, a user UID as that value, a user UID as that value. Now, let's create a variable called, I think we've already, let me see whether we've already created it. Yeah, supervisor UID. So let's search for supervisor. Yes, supervisor UID. So let's assume we want to use supervisor UID variable to hold the UID of the user profile of the supervisor that the user will select. Okay, remember value-based assignment, and we're using a variable for the value-based assignment. And that variable in this particular context for a supervisor task, we're using supervisor UID. So it means that we need to find a way of making this supervisor UID variable to hold the UID of the supervisor that should attend to the case at the supervisor approval task. Okay, so one way of doing that, let's save this, is what we have created on this form. If you check the form again, you see that there's a supervisor UID field there already. and it's tied to its values. If you click on this, you see a list of values. You see that these three names are the three persons in our supervisor group, and that's because we are using an SQL, a MySQL query to determine that. So if look at, let's see what the query is about. If I copy this query here and go to ADSQL and run the query directly against the ProcessMaker database. So this is the query. We run it, you see. So it means the key for every option you see in the drop down, the key is the user UID, and the label is a concatenation of the user first name, a space, and the user last name. So it's this query that is providing the source values for this drop-down control, so that when you view it, you can see this. And remember, this drop-down control is tied to the supervisor UID variable. And it's the supervisor UID variable that is serving as the variable for our value-based assignments. So it means that once the user is on this form at the initiation task and selects someone from this list, the value of the variable for this control automatically becomes the user UID of the user that the employee has selected. And that person that has been selected as a supervisor is who the case will be routed to based on our value based or in respect to our value based assignment and the variable we are using for that value based assignment. Okay, so let's go back to this case again and go to our drafts and open the same draft case. If we select Alex Chidi and click on submit, you see that the next user is Alex Chidi. Let's go back. We select Adeola Adeoye and click on submit. The next user is Adeola Adeoye. Let's go back. If we select Audu Bako and click on submit, the next user is Audu Bako. So that's how value-based assignment works. Okay. So it's, if we want to compare cyclical, can do a comparison between cyclical assignment, manual assignment, and value-based assignments. We want to compare all of that. It all depends on the business requirements for your process. Normally, I don't like using the cyclical assignments because I never use the cyclical assignment for processes I have designed because the business requirements of the processes I designed, they've never required a case for cyclical assignments. Yeah, that is, there's always a specific person or a group of users, and in that group of users, the clients or the business units that own the process will normally say, it should be assigned to this specific person, or if it's a group of users, they will tell you, let everybody have access to it, and the first person who picks it will then treat it. And that's very important because there are times when if you look at the number of persons or the persons that are in a particular group, some may be out of office at the points when the case gets to the queue, and some may be in the office. So if you're using cyclical assignments and ProcessMaker does a round robin pattern and then assigns it to a person who is out of office for that day, then it means that two possibilities now exist. Is either everybody waits for that person to resume work and treats the case, or you need to get your ProcessMaker system administrator to reassign the case to whoever is available in the office or available for work. So that's one limitation of the um, cyclical assignment method. It only really works perfectly for scenarios where you know that everybody in the assigned group will always be available for work. And let's say like a call-in center, a customer care center, where as calls come in, they are routed from one person, they are assigned to one person or the other in a round robin pattern. So in that particular scenario, all the customer service agents are always at their desk, and then just assigning to the next available person like that. And then for the manual might be useful for some cases, like what we saw in the demonstration we did quite a little while ago. And you are able to select from a drop down who the next user will be. It's something like that that we've now defined or determined, or something similar is what we've just done using a drop down on our form for the person to select his supervisor. So I much prefer using the value-based assignment because it has some superiority over the cyclical and manual the cyclical and manual assignment methods. Yeah. So that's that. Let's go back and discuss the other assignment methods that are there. We've talked about three so far. Then let's talk about the fourth one, report to. Now, report to makes use of the departmental structure that you have defined in ProcessMaker. And once again, the reports will demo it, but in practice, based on my experience, I don't use the reports tool because it's strictly tied to the departmental organizational structure that have been defined on the particular ProcessMaker instance. And remember, when we were talking about departments, we said that the HRO for that organization or the system admin, they have to be very, very vigilant as soon as a person moves from one department to the other, that they go to make those changes reflect on ProcessMaker. It's kind of tedious to me. So I much more avoid using reports tool in any of my process design so that the efficacy or stability of the process is not tied to whatever has been defined as departments on that ProcessMaker instance, and so not subjected to errors or errors that may arise from having users in a department, users that have left the organization still in the department, and so cases have been routed to such persons. Or a person is no longer in a particular department, has been moved to another department, but because that change has not been done in the department structure in ProcessMaker, that person still gets cases they are not supposed to get. But anyway, let's just demo these reports too and see how it works. Okay. So if we discard, if we go to the supervisor and we set the assignment rules and we select reports to, in other words, and then we assign the supervisor's group, it means when a user like Anu Belu raises a case, then ProcessMaker will need to check what department does he belong to and who is the manager for that department. And if ProcessMaker is able to get the manager of the department the employee belongs to, then that supervisor or that manager is who the case will be routed to. So let us see. Let's take reports to assign supervisors, their supervisors group, and let's save. Now, if we go to departments here, remember in our previous lesson, we created the administration department that also has a sub-department utilities under it. So let's see, who are the users in administration? You see there's Adeola Adeoye, there's Bako Audu and Alex Chidi, okay? So there's no Anu Bello there. And we see that the manager for administration is Audu Bako. Now, when we go to utilities and check the users, so Anu Bello is in utilities and there's also Ruth Ovi. Now, there is no assigned manager here. And remember, we said that if there's no assigned manager for a sub-department, then the manager automatically becomes the manager of the parent department automatically becomes the manager or is deemed to be the manager of the sub-department. Now, just to show you something, let's go to the users for utilities and remove Anu Bello from the list such that Anu Bello is not in utilities and Anu Bello is not in administration. But remember, Anu Bello is the one raising a request. Let's go back to drafts and reopen the draft case. Anu Bello is the one raising a request. And we said that when he submits the case should route to his supervisor who he reports to. Unfortunately, in this ProcessMaker instance, Anu Bello is not in any of the departments that have been defined. So let's see what happens when there is such a scenario. When click on submit, you see it just selects the next user to be Anu Bello. So Anu Bello is submitting the case to Anu Bello because Anu Bello is not in any department. Anu Bello is reporting to himself. Okay, now let's go back. If we add Anu Bello to utilities again, automatically his manager becomes, sorry, and let's define the, let's edit and select his manager in utilities to be Ruth OVA and we save. So the manager for utilities is Ruth OVA. Now, when you go back to Anu Bello and you click on this, you see that the next user will be Ruth OVA. But what if utilities does not have a supervisor or a manager? No manager is selected and we save. Then automatically the manager for utilities will be the manager for the parent department that's out, which is in this case is Audu Bako. So you go back here, and if we go back and try to submit again, you see that the next user is now Audu Bako. So you can immediately see the restrictions or the restrictive nature of using reports tool, that it's based on what has been defined in the departmental structure or the organizational structure in the departments section of ProcessMaker. And if a person is not placed in any department, then the case will route to the same person. Okay. So let's go back here. So we've talked about reports to them. What about self-service? So self-service is another very useful assignment method that I've used in my practice because again, much of the business requirements we get from clients really are really good use cases for both the value-based assignment and the self-service assignment methods. Now, what self-service actually does is that the case is routed to everybody in the assigned group. So even if we add 15 groups on the assigned users list, and the case is routed to the queue of everybody in the assigned groups. However, it will not be in their inbox. It will not be in their inbox. It's going to be in their unassigned folder. Unassigned folder. So let us see. Remember that for our supervisors group, we have 3 users. There's Adeola Adeoye, there's Alex Chidi, and Audu Bako. And now we have determined that this task, the supervisor task, should be self-service as an assignment group, and we've assigned supervisors group to it. Okay. Now, when Anu Bello submits his request, you see the next user is unassigned. The next user is unassigned. If we click to continue, it's submitted. Okay. Now, let's log out and log in as who? Adeola Adeoye. Okay. We log in as Adeola.Adeoye. You come to discover that if you go to unassigned, that there's a case there. Case 5 that we just raised is there. Let me log out and log in as Audu Bako. And we go to home unassigned. The case number 5 is still there. Log out and log in as Alex.Chidi, admin. Sorry, we're not signing in as the admin. Alex.Chidi. I hope I have the correct password. No, I have the wrong password. Let us change the password, edit the user, and change the password to a simple password admin. So this Alex Chidi, edit, make a password, type admin here, and admin here, and let's save. Okay, so we should be able to, let's refresh, then okay. What's wrong? Let's see, Alex. Am I typing your name correctly? Let's see. Oh, Alex. So let's edit it. It should be Alex. Sorry about that. Should be Alex. Let's see. No wonder. Okay, let's refresh. Alex.Chidi. Yeah. So if we go to unassigned, you see that case 5 is also on in Alex Chidi's unassigned tree. So what self-service does is that for the group or groups that have been assigned to that task for which a self-service case assignment has been defined, when the case is routed to that task, it is routed to the unassigned folder of every user of the assigned groups. However, not all of them can treat the case, in the sense that it doesn't mean that in this particular scenario now, that the 3 of them will open the case and treat whenever they like. No. What it means, when a case is in the unassigned folder, it means the first person to claim the case is the one that eventually treats the case. So remember here, we are logged in as Alex Chidi. And Alex Chidi has gone to their unassigned folder and they can see case number 5. Let's double click and you see this comes out to say claim case. The moment he claims the case, remember we're having this error now because we've not ever defined let's go back to our process. We've not defined the conditions. The conditions here, none of them is routing to true. So let's and again, because we've not added a form to this, so let's add a form so that it does not start evaluating the conditions. It will meet the form first before talking about conditions. So let's go back. The moment this happens, you see that it's no longer in the assigned tree. It is now, case number 5 is now in Alex Chidi's inbox. Now we can open it and we see this. However, remember now, because the case has moved from the unassigned of Alex GD to his inbox because he claimed the case, it will no longer be available in the unassigned of someone like Audu Bako, where that saw it before. So the first person to claim the case treats the case. You go to unassigned now. Case number 5 is no longer there. You go to inbox. Case number 5 is not there because Audu Bako is not the person that claimed the case. So that's how self-service works. So what about the last one? Self-service value-based. Now, this is a hybrid between the value-based assignments method and the self-service method. So in other words, it allows us to, for value-based assignment, we use the UID of the user or a user. For self-service value-based assignment, we use the UID of the group, either the specific user or the UID of the group of users that can claim the case from the unassigned pool. Where self-service value-based assignment is very important is for situations or scenarios where the user for the task can either be a specific user that is determined at one time or a group. So let's assume it's an approval task. And if it's a certain amount, then let's assume it's below, it's 10,000 or below, the amount is 10,000 or below, then the accountant in the organization, a specific person, treats the case. However, let me revise that. Let's assume it's for this particular context, you have, if it's 10,000 or below, a group called accountants or finance officers, they can treat the case. But if it's above 10,000, then the CFO should treat the case. The CFO will be one person, but the accountant is a group of users. The CFO is one user, the accountant or finance officers group is a group of users. And you assign these two to a case, to a task. And you want to be able to determine whether the case at runtime should go to the accountant group or go to the queue of the CFO. In that case, we would use a variable here for self-service value base. And at runtime, based on the amount that is involved in the request, we'll then determine that the variable we use here, let's assume we call this variable finance approval. Then it means that if at runtime we now determine based on the amounts in the request that this finance approval variable can either be the UID of the CFO or the group UID. Come again. At runtime, it will either be the user UID of the user CFO or the group UID of the group accountants. So in such a scenario, that's where the self-service value-based assignment, it's very important. Then there are other scenarios like that we've met in practice where let's still use the accountants group now. You have a situation where you have a task for accountants approval, and accountants can raise a request on that process, but you do not want when a case that has been raised or initiated by an accountant, a member of the accountant group, you do not want when that case gets to the accountant approval task for that initiator to be able to claim the case. So for such a context, to self-service value-based assignment is very important in the sense that you can get the UIDs, you use a trigger to get the UID or put PHP logic in a trigger that will get the UIDs of all the accountants or the users that are in the accountants group. And then at runtime, you check if the case owner or the person who initiated the case is an accountant, if his UID is in the array of the UIDs of members of the accountant group. So if that is the case, what you now do is to remove the UID of the initiator from the accountants, the array of the UIDs in the accountants group. And then when the case is routed to that particular task, every other person in the accountants group will see the case in their own assigned. But because the initiator is a member of that group, he or she will not see that case in their own assigned folder. So that's another use case, another scenario where your self-service value-based assignment can be very, very useful and practical. We've come to the end of this lesson. So far, so good. We've discussed our task steps and our task assignment. Very soon, we shall be using this knowledge in building or working on our cash advance and expense retirement process. See you in the next lesson.